It began as a whisper so small, so harmless, so ordinary that no one in Windsor imagined it could spark the most controversial moment in young Princess Charlotte's life. Yet within hours, this whisper would mutate into a storm, threatening reputations, exposing hidden prejudices, and forcing the monarchy to confront an uncomfortable truth buried behind polished smiles. And it all started with one careless remark about Catherine's accent made in the worst possible place, at the worst possible moment, by the worst possible person. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The morning had begun like any other inside the private Windsor classroom, a space designed to feel warm and intellectually stimulating. But for Charlotte, there was always an unspoken pressure lingering beneath the polished learning environment, a pressure she never complained about, yet always felt. It wasn't the academic expectations that weighed on her. It was the awareness that every adult in that room evaluated her not only as a student, but as a princess. And because of that, she developed a sharp moral instinct far beyond her age. An instinct that warned her when something was wrong, even before the words were spoken. That instinct stirred early that day as she sensed the teacher's simmering frustration with the lesson, the subtle irritation in their tone, the way they dismissed innocent questions with a forced smile that never reached their eyes. Charlotte tried to ignore it, yet every slight shift in the teacher's voice made her chest tighten, because she had learned to recognize when someone carried quiet resentment, especially toward her family. But it was when the lesson reached a simple mention of her mother that everything inside her changed. The teacher paused, rolled their eyes with a carelessness that sliced through the room, and then, in a moment so quick yet cruel, mimicked Catherine's accent with a sharp, mocking twist. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The children froze, the air thinned. Charlotte felt the world tilt. Not from embarrassment, but from something deeper. An instinctive, fierce loyalty ignited without warning. Her classmates stared at her, not with amusement, but with the stunned realization that they had just witnessed something unforgivable. In that split second, Charlotte wasn't merely a child hearing her mother mocked. She was a young royal, recognizing disrespect wrapped in condescension from an adult who should have known better. The teacher's smirk lingered a second too long, revealing a confidence that suggested this wasn't their first time slipping such comments between lessons, a hint of a deeper pattern they believed no one would ever question. Yet Charlotte questioned it instantly, her demeanor shifting from quiet concentration to a silent intensity that unsettled even the children sitting closest to her. It was the kind of shift that signaled a storm long before the thunder ever reached the sky, a warning that the mockery had awakened a side of her the teacher never expected. What Charlotte did next shocked even those who believed they already understood her fierce loyalty, because her reaction didn't end in that classroom. It only began there. Princess Charlotte had seen palace scandals, overheard whispers of politics, even sensed fractures behind polished royal unity, but nothing prepared her for the cold, the sharp sting of hearing her mother mocked by someone entrusted with shaping her education. In that moment, something snapped, something fierce, something protective, something unmistakably Windsor. And as the teacher smirked, Charlotte made a decision that would ripple far beyond the walls of her classroom. The words still echoed in her head, each syllable carrying the weight of a wound she didn't expect to feel so deeply. Hurt pulsed through her first, sharp and disorienting, a feeling she tried to swallow. But hurt slowly tightened into anger. Anger sharpened into resolve, and resolve solidified into something unshakable. Something that pushed her forward before she even understood what she was about to do. She felt her pulse hammering, not from fear but from an almost instinctive certainty that this was a line that could not be crossed, not by anyone, not in her presence. She rose from her seat with a quiet force that silenced even the smallest shuffle in the room. Her voice trembled, but not from weakness. It trembled from the pressure of emotion, fighting to stay controlled as she told the teacher that their words were unacceptable. The teacher, instead of recognizing the seriousness of her tone, dismissed her with a wave of arrogance that only deepened the wound. Their response carried a casual cruelty, a suggestion that Charlotte was overreacting, that her feelings were irrelevant, that mocking a royal mocking Catherine was somehow harmless. The dismissal lit the fuse she had tried to suppress. For the first time in her life, she invoked her title not out of pride, but out of necessity, insisting that respect was not optional, that her mother's dignity was not to be toyed with for amusement or authority. Her classmates watched in stunned silence, their wide eyes revealing the realization that they were witnessing something rare, something raw, something far more powerful than a simple classroom disagreement. They weren't just seeing a princess defending her mother. They were seeing a child understand the weight of her identity in real time. Understand that silence in the face of cruelty only feeds the cruelty. And in that realization, they knew the moment was spiraling into territory none of them had ever imagined. Charlotte drew in a steady breath, straightened her posture, and spoke with a level of command far beyond her years. She told the teacher to leave the classroom, not later, not after an apology. Now, her voice rang with authority that didn't need to be loud to be absolute. It was a decision born from instinct, loyalty, and a refusal to allow humiliation to be brushed aside as a joke. The teacher stared at her as if she had lost her mind, but the children felt the shift, felt the rising pressure in the room that made resistance impossible. Charlotte held her ground, unblinking, unwavering, unwilling to retreat from the stance she had taken. And in that stillness, the teacher hesitated long enough for everyone present to understand that Charlotte's command was not a childish outburst, but a declaration. A turning point, a line drawn not in silence, but in courage. But what Charlotte believed would end the insult was merely the first spark in a firestorm the palace could no longer contain. By midday, Windsor Castle felt different, charged, unsettled, alive with rumour. A simple classroom dispute had mutated into a palace-wide crisis, pitting loyalty against tradition and silence against justice. Staff members exchanged nervous glances, advisors whispered in corners, and for the first time, senior aides wondered if Princess Charlotte had just stepped into a political battlefield without realizing she'd crossed the line. The whisper of what had happened in that private classroom drifted through the halls with increasing urgency, slipping from one pair of startled lips to another until it reached the offices of people who normally dismissed children's conflicts without a second thought. But this time was different. This time the incident carried the weight of a royal child, drawing a boundary that could not be ignored, not when the subject of the insult was the Princess of Wales herself. News reached junior staff, first maids, attendants, security footmen, each reacting with a mixture of disbelief and a quiet, simmering protectiveness toward the young princess, who had always been polite, thoughtful, and composed. Their murmurs built an emotional current that grew, stronger as it moved upward through the palace hierarchy. By the time senior advisors received the first fragmented reports, the atmosphere was already thick with anxiety. Some saw Charlotte's reaction as a bold act of courage, a spark of the same moral steel that had defined some of the monarchy's strongest figures. Others feared she had acted impulsively, stepping into a realm children were supposedly sheltered from, a realm where motives could be twisted and turned into weapons against her family. That split admiration versus apprehension created an undercurrent of tension that only deepened when the full story reached the people who mattered most. Catherine heard the news in a quiet corridor, and the shock that washed over her wasn't loud or dramatic. It was silent, heavy, the kind of stunned stillness that comes when an old wound is pressed without warning. Her composure did not falter, but the emotional weight behind her eyes unsettled the aide who delivered the message. And when William learned what had happened, his calm fractured instantly, not because Charlotte had acted out, but because an adult entrusted with his daughter's education had disrespected his wife with such ease. His anger burned louder than he intended, echoing through the room, forcing advisors to rethink the seriousness of the situation. Behind closed doors, panic began to rise. Advisors feared that if even a fragment of this story leaked, it would ignite a media storm. The monarchy was already under constant scrutiny, and a scandal involving a royal child expelling a teacher would feed a narrative they had spent years trying to avoid. They worried the public would twist Charlotte's stance as entitlement or immaturity, when those closest to her saw it as nothing more than a daughter defending her mother. And so, In desperation, they rushed into meetings, drafted protocols, and urged the family to prepare a united explanation, one that would protect Charlotte without revealing the full ugliness of what had been said. An internal investigation was quietly launched within the hour, and while adults debated how to frame the incident, Charlotte refused to retract her order. She stood by every word she had spoken. Her resolve didn't shake, even when advisors gently tried to convince her that softening her stance would ease the tension. To her, the insult wasn't negotiable. Respect wasn't optional. Her mother's dignity wasn't something she would allow anyone to mock again, no matter the consequences. That defiance, so calm and steady, forced the palace to recognize that this moment was no longer a simple misunderstanding. It was a confrontation with deeper implications than any of them had anticipated. But while the adults scrambled to control the narrative, Charlotte prepared to reveal something they had all overlooked. Behind Catherine's calm public image lies a chapter few have ever heard, a chapter filled with subtle insults, whispered judgments, and quiet endurance. When her daughter burst into her private quarters in tears, Catherine realized the past she had worked so hard to bury had returned in the most painful way possible. And suddenly, Charlotte's anger no longer felt childish, it felt justified. The moment Charlotte stepped into the room, trembling with emotion but refusing to show fear, Catherine felt a memory she had locked away, resurface with brutal clarity, the memory of voices that once reduced her to a stereotype, mocking her roots as if her background was something she should hide. She pulled Charlotte close, hearing the broken, breathless words spill from her. And in that fragile moment, mother and daughter were bound not by privilege, but by shared hurt. For years, Catherine had accepted the quiet cruelty wrapped in polished etiquette, choosing silence because she believed dignity survived best without confrontation. But hearing her daughter repeat that same wound shattered that logic entirely. Charlotte watched, the confusion and pain flicker in her mother's expression, and the emotional weight settled over her like a revelation. She understood then that her mother's grace had come at a cost, one she had paid quietly so no one else would carry the burden. Catherine revealed, in a low, steady voice, that long before she became Princess of Wales, there had been moments in royal circles where her accent was treated as an oddity rather than an identity, mimicked behind closed doors, or poked at during private conversations. She had endured it because she believed it was temporary, a prejudice that would die out as she proved her worth. But hearing her daughter describe their teacher's mockery made her realize the judgment she once endured was still alive, directed now at the next generation. Yet even in pain, Catherine faced a familiar inner conflict whether to teach grace or confront injustice. She wanted her daughter to inherit strength, not bitterness, and she struggled with the fear that pushing back too hard would only feed the narrative that the royal family was fragile and defensive. But William shattered that hesitation the moment he heard the full truth. His fury was unmistakable. He vowed not to let this insult pass quietly, promising he would stand behind Charlotte no matter the political fallout. His certainty gave Catherine the permission she had never allowed herself to acknowledge, that silence had protected no one. Charlotte listened to her parents with a maturity that startled them both. Instead of retreating or second-guessing herself, her determination only grew stronger. She refused to apologize, refused to minimize the disrespect, refused to let her teacher's behavior be folded into the category of misunderstandings that powerful people often hide behind. Her voice, still small but unwavering, pushed back against centuries of selective tolerance. And while advisors scrambled in the background, desperate to contain the situation and convince Catherine to distance herself from Charlotte's actions, they found themselves facing an unexpected shift. Catherine, usually the one who calmed storms, stood firmly with her daughter, privately insisting the issue must be addressed honestly, not smoothed over for convenience. Her resolve stunned her team and signaled a turning point no one had anticipated. That emotional unity between mother and daughter changed the entire landscape of the crisis, setting a new chain of events into motion, events that would expose what the palace thought it had buried. But what no one expected was that the teacher had secrets of their own, and those secrets were about to surface. As investigators dug deeper into the teacher's background, a disturbing pattern emerged, far more unsettling than a single insulting remark. Behind the polished resume lay stories of quiet complaints, subtle discrimination, and whispers ignored by institutions, desperate to avoid scandal. And suddenly, the palace realized Charlotte's reaction might not have been an overreach at all, but the exposure of a long-concealed truth. What began as a simple disciplinary review quickly evolved into something darker. Something that made even the most seasoned advisors shift uncomfortably in their chairs. This teacher, once celebrated for their strict academic standards, had left behind a trail of unease in every previous school. A trail that had been conveniently minimized, explained away, or buried under glowing letters of recommendation written more out of relief than admiration. Former students began to resurface, quietly at first, sharing experiences that sounded hauntingly familiar. Small comments wrapped in humor, subtle jabs at backgrounds, accents, or family circumstances, remarks brushed aside as harmless by those who preferred ease over accountability. Patterns emerged like bruises beneath the surface. The same tone, the same dismissive smirk, the same insistence that students were too sensitive when they spoke up. The palace advisors, initially convinced this was a one-off lapse in judgment, soon recognized that Charlotte had confronted a behavior that many adults had failed to stop, and the realization hit them with unsettling clarity. This was not an isolated misstep. This was a habit, a method, a pattern of belittling that had been allowed to thrive because no one with enough power had ever challenged it until Charlotte. The discovery rattled Catherine and William. They had assumed their children were insulated from the petty cruelties of the world, protected by careful vetting and trusted institutions. But now they were forced to face an uncomfortable truth. Even within the walls of Windsor, their children were not as shielded as they believed. Catherine's earlier wounds felt sharper in hindsight, echoing a cycle she thought she had outgrown. William's anger deepened into something colder, more deliberate, as he questioned how such a person had been allowed access to their daughter at all. Their children's safety, emotional and otherwise, suddenly felt far more fragile than they had imagined. Tensions surged among palace aides as conflicting priorities clashed. Some argued for a quiet removal to prevent further scrutiny, convincing themselves that silence equaled stability. Others demanded accountability, insisting that covering up a pattern this harmful would only deepen the long-term damage. Meetings turned heated, advisors snapping at one another as anxieties escalated. The public relations team grew increasingly frantic as whispers began to slip beyond palace walls, spreading among journalists who sensed a story simmering beneath official silence. One wrong move, one vague statement, one hint of evasion, and the monarchy would face a storm they weren't prepared to weather. Behind closed doors, panic mingled with guilt as the palace realized how close they had been to dismissing Charlotte's response as childish impulsiveness instead of the instinctive moral clarity it truly was. And as they drafted their private plan, carefully measured, cautiously worded, designed to handle the situation discreetly, someone inside Windsor made a choice none of them saw coming. And just as the palace prepared to act privately, someone inside Windsor leaked the incident to the outside world. The story hit the internet like lightning, raw, unfiltered, impossible to contain. Princess Charlotte expels her teacher blazed across headlines, igniting debates, outrage, and an avalanche of scrutiny unlike anything the young princess had ever faced. Overnight, a private confrontation became a national reckoning, forcing the monarchy to choose between silence and a truth that could shatter carefully crafted illusions. The leak spread faster than the palace could blink, racing across platforms, forums, and newsrooms with a ferocity that made containment impossible. What had begun as a confidential internal matter erupted into a nationwide argument about power, respect, class, privilege, and a child who dared to challenge an adult in a system that demanded quiet obedience. Suddenly, every voice online felt entitled to interpret Charlotte's actions, twisting her bravery into narratives she never asked to carry. Social media fractured into two loud, competing realities. One side hailed her as a symbol of generational defiance, a young royal refusing to tolerate cruelty, setting an example for children everywhere who felt belittled or unheard. They praised her courage, her empathy, her refusal to accept disrespect in silence. But the other side condemned her, claiming she had overstepped, calling her entitled or arrogant, ignoring the context, and rushing to paint her as a child drunk on power. The flood of opinions grew so overwhelming that the palace's communication team spiraled into crisis mode, scrambling to understand how the leak had escaped their walls and how deeply the narrative had already taken hold. Journalists camped outside royal gates, firing off question after question, demanding statements, clarity, accountability, anything they could twist into a headline. Every unanswered inquiry amplified public curiosity, making silence feel more dangerous with every passing hour. As the story intensified, Charlotte found herself at the center of a storm she never intended to create. And in that chaos, something unexpected began to unfold. She became a symbol not by design, but by sheer force of circumstance of a new kind of royal, one who rejected quiet submission and dared to call out disrespect even when the world expected her to swallow it. Commentators debated whether she had inherited her father's unyielding conviction or her mother's quiet emotional depth, but none of them understood the turmoil she felt as strangers judged her choices without knowing the pain behind them. Catherine watched all of this unfold with a mixture of heartbreak and pride. It pained her to see her daughter's courage turned into a spectacle, to see Charlotte treated as a political pawn instead of a child defending her mother. Every harsh comment cut through her carefully maintained composure, reminding her of her own early years when people questioned her worth, scrutinized her background, and mocked her differences. This time, however, the target was her daughter, and that agony ran deeper than anything she had endured alone. William, sensing the escalating danger, prepared to deliver a statement that could steady the narrative. He drafted words late into the night, firm, protective, measured but hesitated each time he reached the moment where he needed to speak with absolute clarity. The stakes had never been higher. One wrong phrase could fuel accusations of manipulation or overreaction. One overly gentle line could make the monarchy appear weak or defensive. His silence, meant to be strategic, became a source of growing frustration among advisors, who feared the story was spiraling beyond their control. They argued in hushed but urgent tones that the monarchy was losing ground every minute they failed to respond. To them, the optics of hesitation mattered more than the emotional truth beneath the crisis. And the longer they waited, the harsher the storm became. By the following morning, tension inside Windsor had reached a breaking point. Advisors feared that no matter what the palace said, whether they supported Charlotte wholeheartedly or framed the event as a misunderstanding, the monarchy would be painted as either oppressive or out of touch. Every path seemed disastrous. Every option came with consequences. The crisis had shifted from a disciplinary issue to a defining moment in public perception, and the institution found itself caught between protecting a child and preserving its own image. The pressure built like a ticking clock, echoing through every corridor, pushing the family toward a decision none of them felt ready to make. But instead of the palace speaking first, someone else steps into the spotlight, someone who changes everything. She was told to stay quiet, to let the adults handle the situation, to sit in silence while her name was dragged across headlines. But Charlotte, driven by a fire inherited from both her parents, refused to let others twist the truth. And in a moment no one could have predicted, the young princess decided to speak for herself calmly, boldly, and with a clarity that stunned the nation. For days, she had watched strangers debate her intentions, watched pundits dissect her character, watched commentators reduce her to either a rebellious child or an entitled royal. None of them understood her heart, her loyalty, or the pain that had triggered her reaction. And Charlotte, despite her age, recognized something the palace had not. Silence would not protect her. Silence would not protect her mother. Silence would only allow the lie to grow stronger. She knew she had to speak. When she told Catherine and William that she wanted to give her own statement, they froze not because they doubted her, but because they feared the magnitude of what she was about to step into. Catherine's instinct was to shield her, to carry the burden for her, to keep her safe from the harsh glare of public judgment. William's instinct was to fight the world on her behalf, to stand between his daughter and every vicious headline. Yet both of them saw the unwavering resolve in Charlotte's eyes, the same strength Catherine had shown when she first entered the royal world, the same determination William had inherited from generations before him. Torn between fear and pride, they realized they could not silence her without breaking something essential within her. So they made a choice that few royal parents would ever make. They let her speak. Charlotte prepared her words carefully, not with advisors or PR handlers, but with the honesty of a child who understood respect more deeply than many adults. When the cameras finally rolled, she didn't hide behind titles or protocols. She simply told the truth. She explained that mocking her mother was unacceptable not because Catherine was royalty, but because no parent, no person deserved to be belittled for where they came from or how they spoke. She spoke with quiet dignity, her voice steady as she described the sting of hearing cruelty disguised as humor. And then, in a moment that rippled across the country, she addressed every child who had ever been mocked for their accent, their background, or their differences. She told them they were allowed to speak up. They were allowed to defend themselves. They were allowed to say no. Her words struck a nerve instantly. The narrative that had been slipping away from the palace snapped sharply in her favor. Social media feeds flooded with support, praising her courage, her empathy, and her refusal to hide behind royal protection. Teachers, parents, and young students posted messages echoing her sentiment. Commentators who had earlier criticized her backtracked, acknowledging the maturity and depth of her statement. What the palace had struggled to accomplish with strategy and messaging, Charlotte achieved with sincerity and conviction in a single, powerful address. But as the public rallied behind her, one voice attempted to disrupt the rising tide. The teacher, trying desperately to salvage their reputation, they issued their own statement, filled with excuses, claiming misunderstanding, insisting their remark was harmless, and suggesting Charlotte had reacted emotionally rather than logically. Yet instead of helping them, the statement backfired with explosive force. Former students stepped forward with renewed confidence, offering stories that aligned with Charlotte's experience. Parents came forward with concerns they had been too intimidated to raise, and every attempt the teacher made to shift blame only spotlighted the very behavior the investigation had uncovered. What had once appeared to some as a child overreacting now stood exposed as a child refusing to tolerate what many adults had allowed for far too long. Charlotte's calm defiance reshaped the entire crisis, turning a scandal into a moment of national reflection. But while admiration surged and support strengthened, a deeper, more challenging question began to form within the monarchy, one that could not be answered with speeches or statements alone. Yet even as the public rallied behind Charlotte, the monarchy faced one final question, one that required more than words to answer. In the end, the monarchy had to choose what it truly stood for: quiet conformity or principled courage. Charlotte's defiance had reshaped the conversation. Catherine's vulnerability had deepened the emotional stakes, and William's resolve had sharpened the line between respect and entitlement. Now, the final decision loomed, one that would not only determine the teacher's fate, but redefine the boundaries of royal dignity for a new generation. The palace could no longer hide behind polished statements or diplomatic phrasing. The truth had been laid bare for the nation to see, and for the first time in years, the monarchy was being judged not on tradition, but on the moral choices of those within it. The pressure bearing down on the institution was immense, yet beneath that weight, something unexpected happened: a clarity, a unity, a refusal to bow to political convenience. When the final meeting concluded, the decision was unmistakable. The palace would uphold Charlotte's actions without hesitation. They released a formal statement confirming that her response had been appropriate, justified, and aligned with the values the monarchy claimed to represent. They acknowledged the findings of the internal investigation, which revealed a consistent pattern of misconduct that had gone unchallenged for far too long. With that confirmation, the teacher was removed permanently, not through quiet dismissal or vague phrasing, but through a direct acknowledgement of the harm caused. It was a bold move, one that would undoubtedly spark controversy, but it was also the only decision that honored the truth. Behind closed doors, Catherine found a moment to speak to her daughter, away from the cameras and advisors. The gratitude she expressed was quiet but powerful, carrying the emotional depth of a woman who had endured more subtle cruelty than the public would ever know. She told Charlotte that her courage had broken a cycle, that her refusal to stay silent had done something Catherine herself had wished she had been brave enough to do when she first entered the royal world. And for Charlotte, hearing those words softened the weight of the past weeks, replacing it with a pride that wasn't loud or boastful, just steady, earned, and deeply rooted. William took on the final public duty of the crisis. Addressing the nation with a steady voice, he echoed Charlotte's message of respect and fairness, framing the incident not as a scandal, but as a moment of necessary reflection for institutions everywhere. His words struck a balance between strength and empathy, offering support to children who had lived through similar experiences while reaffirming the monarchy's responsibility to lead with integrity. His speech didn't erase the controversy, but it reframed it, giving the nation something meaningful to consider what kind of society they wanted to raise their children in, and what standards they wanted from the people who shaped young minds. Meanwhile, royal advisors braced themselves for the long-term implications. They knew this decision would ripple outward, affecting future staffing, altering public expectations, reshaping the monarchy's relationship with transparency. Some feared the consequences, but others recognized the rare opportunity hidden within the chaos. The chance to redefine what strength looked like for the royal family. And at the center of that transformation stood a young princess who refused to let silence be mistaken for grace. As public support surged, commentators began to speculate about Charlotte's future role. They spoke of her fierce moral clarity, her instinctive sense of justice, her refusal to let cruelty hide behind authority. They wondered whether this moment, this single, emotional, defiant stand, might be the first sign of the leader she would one day become. She didn't know it, but she had already begun shaping a legacy, not through royal duty or ceremonial tradition, but through courage drawn from honesty rather than hierarchy. Her actions had drawn a line clear, bold, unshakable one that signaled to Britain and beyond that respect was not a luxury reserved for the powerful. It was a standard demanded by the young princess who would one day help define the monarchy's place in a rapidly changing world. One day it became clear that this moment, born from a single insult, was only the beginning of a legacy being shaped in real time. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.